What if I told you that you can fall head over heels in love with yourself? I'm talking that all-consuming, can't get enough, love everything about you type of love. Well, you can. The Self Plus Love Equals Balance podcast is here to show you how. Every week, we'll share tested strategies, personal stories, and invaluable resources to help you take a balanced approach to loving yourself. Here's your host, Carrie, the balanced nurse. Let's get to the love.
Hey ladies, so good to be back for another episode here of Self Plus Love Equals Balance podcast. Again, for you returning ladies, I am so grateful that you are sticking it out with me and spending some time with me. And if you are new, welcome, and I hope that you love our vibe today. So, in light of everything that we are going through as a collective here in the midst of this pandemic, I thought it would be appropriate for this episode to address how to get through your storm mindfully, right? As this podcast is all about how to love yourself, and we kind of dig into all different strategies concerning this, we do not want to shy away from the fact that loving ourselves is not just fluffy and rainbow kisses and facials. It's actually knowing how to navigate our storms that we all will be going through inevitably at some time along our journey, right? And so I wanted to really take this time to dig into this from, I feel, a very necessary point of view and time frame, actually. So I'll use this platform to do just that. And hopefully what you'll be able to get from this is something that you're able to not only apply yourself, but also pass on to other women who are obviously going through their own storm. So, of course, before I dig right into this head first, want to make sure I get the housekeeping out of the way. And actually, there is a little twist because, I always say if you are able to resonate with any of this and you want to definitely vibe on more of a personal level, I do offer sessions. The information is via the link in this episode of wherever you are listening to this episode. But I am also doing a actual special for this coronavirus time where the majority of us are quarantined, and so I am offering remote sessions at a reduced price. Take advantage of it, or also pass it along to someone who you know may need to have additional support. And in these sessions, we're vibing about any and everything that you need to really support you through this time. So just wanted to give that sprinkle of a little more detail. And of course, I'm very responsive. So if there's anything that you want to contact me about, feedback, which I absolutely love, or any questions, you can reach me on info@thebalancedrn.com. All right, ladies, so let's dig in. Let's dig into our storm here. So I actually have as a nurse, we're used to having to come up with acronyms, and acronyms are basically like letters that allow us to remember the main points of whatever it is, whether it's steps or what have you. So I am used to acronyms, whether it's to get my point across or whether it's to help my memory, whether it's to help my son get something, it doesn't matter. And so for this episode, I'd like to share that same strategy with you. So the acronym that I have come up with to get through your storm, our storms, just in general, is AFTER. And it's the word after. So AFTER. And what after represents is to acknowledge, filter, take a moment, express with intention, and release control. And so I'm going to go over each of these steps with you and kind of dig in how it could really help you as far as navigating your storm. So, the first step, A, for acknowledge. Acknowledge is really acknowledging your storms and the details of it. And it sounds very simple. However, think about where we are, not just as a collective, but I definitely want to make sure that I'm bringing this down to an individual level because this time is not the only storm that you're ever going to experience. And I'm sure if you took a couple of minutes, you can think back to a very recent storm because we all have them, right? It's important for us to acknowledge our storm and the details of it, but not uh, really attach emotionally to it. Why? It sounds so easy. Well, because emotions are what fuel overwhelm. It fuels panic, it fuels fear. And so we really are not able to navigate our storm or even see past it through it, you know, when we are overwhelmed and clouded by emotions. And the emotions really cloud our judgment. So knowing that you're going through something is much different than absolutely clouding your vision through it. And so, knowing that something is difficult, knowing that something is unfortunate, um, being able to acknowledge and recognize that it is okay to not be okay. I think when we take the emotions out and we take the judgment out, we're able to take that passenger seat, that objective view to look at something and say, oh, this sucks. All right. You know what? I honestly cannot deal with this today. So I'm just going to just sit back and not be okay for right now. I'll get to this tomorrow, or I'll get always staying in this state of recognizing and or acknowledging, but not being in a complete state of panic and overwhelm. And whatever you have to do to get out of that, I'm going to give you some suggestions, is really important because that is what moves us from the state of being in the midst of our storm, being wrapped up by our storm, as opposed to now taking the outside view, stepping right outside of the midst of that storm to look and say, wow, okay, this storm is heavy, or wow, this is really not as bad as it felt. Or, okay, now that this storm is going on, here are some moves I'm going to have to make. Here are some shifts I'm going to have to make, kind of thing. So there's different ways that we are able to both view and navigate our storm, all depending on our position. And if you are in a position where you're clouded by overwhelm or emotions or fear or panic, it lessens your ability to make that shift to the other position. Does that make sense? You don't want to turn a blind eye. You don't want to be in denial. You don't want to, act like the storm is not happening. But really important to acknowledge, recognize, give yourself the okay to not be okay, but really, as fast as you can, remove the emotions, remove the overwhelm, remove the judgment, remove the why is this happening to me? I can't believe this. Remove all of that. That comes from judgment, that comes from you being critical. Um, Once we get into this space and we kind of sit steadily in this seat, that it's okay to not be okay, we can move on to the next step, which is F, where we want to filter your exposure to negativity as much as possible. And this is really, really important during these times. We've been talking about just how we are easily affected by ourselves, right? We can self sabotage whatever it is that we're working on. But now we're talking about you going through your own storm, and that storm really having the ability to heighten or not based on what you're exposed to. So let's take this time. We talk about the news outlets, the media just in general, social media, right? Even those connections that you had not cut off before this time, the negative Nancy friends, the toxic whatever, these are all affecting us even more if we have not gotten to the step of filtering ourselves, right? I tell everybody, you can fool people, but you cannot fool energy, and negativity is definitely energy, right? So if you are a creative person or you have a really good imagination, an exercise that I like to help people work through this is considering yourself, whether it's in a bubble or having a shield around you, where during this time you're really being protective of what you're allowing to penetrate. Right? It's only the things that are going to nurture you and feed you that you're allowing through this filter. So just taking social media as an example, if you have quite an array of negative people, woe is me people, they're really feeding into your fears and your anxieties, and who those people are, because as soon as you scroll, your chest starts to kind of pound real fast or puff up, and you're feeling really hot. You start to question yourself. You're feeling that knot in your throat. Delete those people. Trust me, you're not the first. You won't be the last. They probably won't even recognize you're trying to filter your exposure here, right? Even things like for us moms, think about our children and, them having nightmares. The first thing we're going to, okay, well, what have they been watching? Where did they learn about this character? Or how did you know about the boogeyman? Those type of things. It's very real. Just because we are no longer children does not mean that we are still not as sensitive to what we expose ourselves to, right? So if the news is driving you crazy, girl, turn that off. There isn't anything that's going to shift in a day that you cannot stand kind of, separating yourself from, while you deal with all of the rest of the information overload that you've had thus far, right? If you are someone that you're comparing yourself to someone, or whatever the case is, social media is not the place for you right now, right? So really filtering your exposure. Start by cutting the negative out. The negative friends, that friend that as soon as you see the phone ring, your chest is tightening up, because you know that they're either going to waste your time, or they're going to feed more into your anxiety, and it turns into a pity party. You hang up feeling worse than when you picked up, right? We don't want that, especially during your storm. Sometimes you may be, stronger, and you're able to navigate it a little bit better. But during your storm, this is the time that we have to become very selective. So, after we kind of get through the step of filtering, and we're in a protective mode, I like to call it, right? We've acknowledged, we've filtered. Now it's time to get into action with our storm. And that is not as difficult as it sounds. The next step is T, which is take a moment for yourself and to yourself, right? So during this time that we're taking this moment, it's not to exist in a state of frenzy. It's still yet. We have acknowledged, we've recognized, we're releasing from that the emotional piece of it. We are filtering. Now, this moment that we're taking for and to ourselves is for us to learn how we are able to soothe ourselves in our storms. So going back to the metaphor of it's not really being too different from babies when it comes to certain aspects. Just like babies learn to self-soothe, we have that ability. We actually have a greater ability, because we have experience to know what it is that makes us feel good and what does not, right? And taking this moment to and for ourselves is where we want to fill it with things that soothe us, things that make us feel good, things that will serve as positive and productive distractions, things that during the regular day to day of us going through life and just trying to make it through, we will tell ourselves we don't have time to do that, or, oh, if I had time, or when I get time, or, when things get better, or, sometimes storms are the shakeup that we need to put us in timeout so that we deal with the things that we are shying away from, right? That we really need to take the time to nurture, to cultivate. And the storm is the way of, I remember, my younger brother he was really a piece of work. And so for me, you tell me to do something, I went and did it. I didn't like anybody talking to me hard. And my mother would always have to put more emphasis into my brother when it came to discipline, whether it's, time for him to sit down or a timeout. And I remember, she would say to him, "Okay, it's time to take a break. It's time to take a break. It's time." And she would say it over and over again. And he would not slow down. He would not take heed. He would not listen to this woman. But she had to lift him up and put him in the corner and say, "It's timeout time." And only then did you see him like look up, where it's like, "Oh, okay, I guess I'll sit here." If you can appreciate this analogy, sometimes, very often, our storms is that parent picking us up and putting us in that corner to say, "Sit here. It's time for us to slow down and for us to nurture and learn how we can soothe ourselves." So, what can we do during this time of self soothing? Well, all the things that you need to take care of yourself that you're normally not doing. I know it sounds really crazy that you're going to start doing this in the midst of your storm, but truly, it's what you need to do. For me and my storms, especially knowing that self care is truly what heals me, I start from the very basic exterior, whether it's getting to my baths, my facials, my physical activity, yoga, breathing, journaling, and dig in a little bit further, a little bit further. You know what? I really need to take this out of my diet. And it can be completely unrelated to what my storm is going through. However, the fact that I have turned inward to start to attempt to soothe myself, you know what? I am so exhausted. I need to get some more sleep. I'm just going to bed. I'm tired. I need to go to bed, knowing that I'm coming off of a few weeks run of barely sleeping. This is the time that you acknowledge these things and get back to the things that make you feel good. If you are a creative person, if you are a musician, if you are a dancer, whatever it is that we do and we feel as though the hustle and bustle of life does not allow us to really nurture these things that uh, really fill our cups, now's the time to really shift and focus on those things as a positive and productive distraction. We all have a level of purpose, creativity, passion within us that we really put a lid on when we shift and say, "Well, I got to go make the dollar. I got to do this. I have to do this. This one needs this. The kids needs that. He needs this. She needs this." No, no. Take a moment to and for yourself and fill that moment with only what feels good. And if you have taken heed and addressed the first step, or the second step rather, as far as filtering your exposure, you're not having to worry about being judged. You're not having to worry about putting on a display for anybody, because now you're filtered and protected. And so it is okay for you to take this moment, right, and nurture yourself. And there's no time limit on this. You have a whole storm going on. Do what feels good for as long as it feels good, right? And then the next step is RE, which is express yourself with intention. And the with intention is so important. I mean, let's go back to social media. People are using it as a therapeutic outlet, or to take jabs, or, to show that they have diarrhea of the mouth and constipation of the brain. Where when you express yourself with intention, it really shifts the focus. I was mentioning before, as far as our step of filtering, sometimes you can end up having a conversation about your storm or just what's going on, or on a very basic level, just your day, and it turns into a pity party. It's like, oh yeah, me too. Oh girl, yeah, me too. And oh, let me bring out my cello if you got the violin. It's at this point, at the end of the conversation, it's like, well, why were we on the phone again? You know, as opposed to, if you are expressing yourself with intention, it is very, very important for you to understand the difference between complaining and making space, and making sure that we're doing this with the right person. You want to have a supportive or like minded person that you are able to feel safe in being able to vent. That's what I mean by making space, right? So when we're cleaning out a closet or organizing a closet, or whatever it is, or a drawer, what we're doing is we're taking the stuff that we no longer need or we no longer have use for, and we're taking it out to make space to be able to put in the stuff that will be useful. That is the type of conversation that you want to have with a supportive and like minded person that understands that this is very critical during your storm. Okay? Not someone to add another layer to your storm, not someone to poo poo your storm, but having the right connection is very important. And you will know who this person is. And it doesn't need to be a lot of people, it can just be one person, because you will feel better getting off the phone with them, or connecting with them, than when you first started. You will truly feel lighter. You'll feel understood. You'll feel supported, right? Where with another person, that pity party kind of feeling, this will feel more so like a strategic chat, I like to call it. When I'm speaking with not just, people I work with, but girlfriends or what have you. And if we're talking about a problem, I always love, addressing the problem, digging in and kind of getting to the root. And I like to ask a lot of, call it get in your business questions, digging in questions. And then it's like, okay, so now what? So now what can we do about it, kind of thing. There's only so much that we can really address the problem without now saying, okay, well, now what? And the reasoning behind that is that it's impossible to plan and worry at the same time. Planning does take acknowledging, right? If we're planning something, we have to know what it is that we're planning for or through, or what have you. But the planning is what helps heal us from the worrying, the fear, the panic. Even if your plan is to do nothing for a period of time, it gives you a sense of comfort in knowing that this is my strategy for this particular thing, instead of harping on the same thing, having the orchestra um, performance of pity and doubt and fear, right? And so we've moved through quite a couple of these steps that I feel are very critical when we're trying to navigate our storm. We've acknowledged the storm. We've removed emotion while we've done that. We've filtered your exposure to negativity as much as possible, whether it's people, experiences, things, outlets, or what have you. We've taken a moment to and for ourselves, right? Where during that time we are nurturing ourselves, we're doing the things that make us feel good, right? We've also acknowledged how important it is for us to express ourselves with intention, right? So, not a pity party, as opposed to looking for that person, that outlet where we can have a strategic chat, right? And this may be outside of your inner circle. I forgot to mention that, because sometimes we get down if we realize that we don't have that type of person around us readily available. It takes, again, that filtering for you to acknowledge that, right? And so the last step is to release, control, and reflect. It's a twofer. Really important. Release, control, and reflect. What does this mean? Well, whether you are religious, spiritual, or just completely in your beingness, there's one thing that I find is just a foundational truth, no matter what it is that everything, everything happens for a reason. Whether we understand it or not, whether we want to admit it or not, what we have to focus on is what we are able to control. And when we have things that occur in our storm, right, that it's greater than us and we are not able to control it, we have to release it. We have to release it, right? Because that's the only way that we're going to be able to have enough energy to focus on what we can control. And once we release control, the part B to this, as I mentioned, it's a twofer. Reflect. Reflect back to your last storm and how you got through that. Reflect on your past successes. Reflect on your strength. Reflect on what other people are going through and that their storms is greater or whatever, so that you can really get into a space of saying, you know something, this is what I can control, this is what I'm going to address, this is what I cannot control, I'm going to release. And know that once I focus on what I can control, the things that I cannot are going to fall in line. And how do you know that? You're going to look back at your last storm, or you're going to look at someone else's storm, because the underlying thing that we forget when it comes to storms, but just because we're in this step, I think is very important, is that we all are aware of some degree of miracles, right? And miracles are completely out of anyone's control. And I think that sometimes we get so caught up in being these control freaks. Remember the analogy I had mentioned about this, holding on locked tight, having this locked tight grip to things, to the outcomes, right? To our results, that we cannot open up that hand to allow ourselves to receive. And that's really where a storm is helpful, because just like that parent taking that child to lift up and put down in timeout to say, sit here, this is what I need you to reflect on. Take a moment to yourself, and when you're ready, let's talk with intention. Let's express yourself with intention, right? We can take that whole timeout analogy and put it right into this acronym, this after acronym, where at the end of it, we have to release control. We have to reflect and just focus on what we can control. And this will help you navigate any and every storm that you have. I do not care how big it is, because trust me, we've all done it, knowingly or not, right? This is just us kind of summarizing it and putting it together and being intentional about addressing this storm, not just for ourselves, but for other people as well too. Right. So I'm hoping that this is really helpful for you, reassuring for you, and of course, right on time for you. That's always my intention anyway. When it comes to what we do here in this community. And so, since we are all in a state of a storm on several different levels and degrees and so forth, in whatever way you have been impacted, please try to take a couple of minutes today. And I'm just going to review the steps, because I want you to be able to really take from this and get into action with this if it's something that you have not already done. I want you to acknowledge the storm, acknowledge the details of your storm. What does that storm consist of, right? Is it an emotional storm? Is it a situational storm? Is it a financial storm? What is it? Is it a health storm? What are the details of that? Recognize it, detach from it emotionally, remove judgment. You are not at fault. You are not a horrible person. You are not being targeted. None of that. Remove all of that. Just acknowledge and address the details. And then filter your exposure. Get into protective mode, right? It's now time for you to recognize what does not make you feel good. Remove those negative Nancy's. Get off of social media if it's not, really serving you. Stop checking the news outlets every 5 minutes. Things have not changed from the day before or from a couple of hours ago. Anything newsworthy, I am sure you will be alerted if you are in your work and trying to just make it right now, right? Take a moment to and for yourself is the next step. Where during that time we are doing like babies do, and where we're getting back to our ability to self-soothe and doing the things that make us feel good, nurturing ourselves, those things we've been neglecting, those things that we've been saying, oh, when I have time, or I'll put off for another time, or when things get better. We are now going back to those things, or really increasing those things. Starting from whatever works for you, inside out or what have you, strategies having to do with really, I always think self and health. So, whether it's your skin, whether it's your food, whether it's getting more sleep, whether it's exercising, whether it's digging into a talent or a passion that you have, doing the things that you've been putting off, right? Whether it's addressing your physical space, all of these things are things that we're doing as we go within to nurture ourselves. Whether it's planning for your future, right? You've been on the hamster wheel and you don't even know where your direction is. Let's start to plan. Let's take some time and do that now that we filtered some things out, right? And then expressing yourself with intention. Having that sounding board, having that supportive, like-minded person. And by like-minded, I mean just understanding where you're trying to go, what you're trying to get out of, knowing that you are not trying to join the orchestra of the violin playing of the pity and the panic and the fear. The person that really understands, okay, so how are we going to navigate this? How are we going to get out of this? I know this is tough, but now what, kind of thing, right? And then releasing control of what you cannot control, focusing on what you can, and reflecting, allowing for miracles, allowing for you to receive, allowing for things to turn around because they always do, right? So I hope that this helps. As I mentioned, again, as I talked about at the beginning of the episode, I am here to provide you with additional support. You want to vibe with me on a more intimate level. Wherever you are listening to this podcast, you have the details on how to connect with me in the episode. Take advantage of my special where I'm doing the sessions for a reduced price. Reach out to me for any other reason via email. That's info@thebalancedrn.com. And until next time, ladies, please continue to do your math differently. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Self plus Love equals Balance. Be sure to rate and review us on whatever app you use to listen. It goes a long way in helping others find our community. Until then, remember to do your math a little differently and love yourself.